did you know, for example, that fascia, when you exercise it beyond, a certain baseline, if you walk your dog every single day for 20 minutes, that's your baseline. We're talking about what you do beyond that. Actually it's in a mixture of collagen deficit and collagen synthesis. And it takes about 30 hours to actually go into collagen synthesis. So if you repeat an exercise within 30 hours, or you train for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, you're actually not allowing your connective tissue system to fully recover. Mm. And that can become an emotional thing. You start feeling a bit sad or a bit depleted or a bit fatigued. What's the matter with me? I don't understand it. I can't sleep very well. I'm getting really agitated. And I have to unpick everything back to, how are you treating your fascia? And so I found myself saying, can I persuade you to do a 20-minute walk every other day? I'm not telling you not to move. I'm not telling you to keep still, but can I just ask you to make a 30-hour gap between your walks instead of 24? Because what's happened over a year is this very slow accumulation of collagen deficit. And what that means is when somebody trips or falls or hurt themselves, the impact of that isn't recovering quickly enough for the timing of that age group or stage of fitness if they're recovering from an illness in a younger person. So all these things have different time frames. Mm. And when we discover the importance of the relationship between fascia and time, it can transform what you expect of yourself. And when you hold yourself as being a bio-emotional creature rather than a biomechanical functioning machine, there's nothing mechanical about you, you start forgiving yourself and demanding of yourself in a tissue appropriate manner. And that means, as in any orchestra, playing the pauses.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Dano, and welcome to Unknowingly Connected, a podcast for people open and curious by nature with specific interests in the human potential and the greater good. Twice a month, I interview professionals who have gathered their diverse passions or gifts to be in service of human leadership. You will hear from their journey and their techniques, crafted to be within everyone's reach, and explained from a scientific, body, mind, and spiritual perspective. It's all connected, and we might not even know it. Welcome to episode 8 of Unknowingly Connected. Today, I have the pleasure to talk to Joanne Avison for the release of the second edition of her book, Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement. As you will see or hear, Joanne is a very knowledgeable teacher around fascia and anatomy, having worked for more than 20 years in those fields. But she is also a pure alchemist. You'll learn why fascia is so important, why it encompasses the body, mind, and spirit, from the separation of body-mind studies at Descartes' time to our understanding of the world, meaning our feelings, perceptions, how we are formed as an embryo, etc., through the fascia. I suggest, if you're interested, to listen to it once and watch the video of our conversation, as we've integrated notes and references of all of what Joanne's talk about. Enjoy. Good morning, Joanne.
Hi, Stephanie.
Nice to have you here. The first thing I wanted to say before we start is actually to say thank you to Helen, to Helen who bring us together. As she worked for you, and she said, I think Joanne would be a good match in your podcast. And I was like, I started to Google and look, and I was like, there, let's do it. I thought it was really interesting. So yeah, thank you, Helen, if you're listening or watching to it very soon.
Helen Edie, she is just beautiful. She's a beautiful teacher and a beautiful human being, and I'm very privileged to have her work with me. So
wonderful.
And I'm delighted to have met you, Stephanie. So all
Absolutely.
good.
And we have a lot to talk because we started to have a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I think this episode is going to be very interesting for people who are yoga teachers, but not only. Might be for coaches or any people who will have any connection to embodiment, and even people who want to learn about fascia, because even today I was talking to a friend and I told about this podcast and she was like, what is fascia? And I was like, this episode is for you. So I was thinking, so maybe for people who would listen and have no idea about that, or maybe they would have heard about fascia recently, but still, it's still not clear. How can we explain it?
Easily.
Usually I would say like, so that my mother-in-law can understand it.
I get it. So, okay, let's imagine that you've got an orange in your hands and you're peeling that orange. On the very, very outside, you've got what we might call the dermis or the skin, and it's the color.
Mm.
So it could be a lime or a grapefruit or a lemon. So it would be green, or it would be lemony yellow, or it would be orangey yellow, or it might be an orange, in which case it would be orange. And you've got this texture and this particular feel that you know you're on that outside skin.
Mm.
And let's say you then peel it and you peel back what we call the pith.
Mm.
Yeah, the thick.
Yeah.
It's not got the same color as the outermost part, but it's got a different texture.
Yeah.
And then as we peel that back and those thick bits off the segments, we come to the segments. And we peel the segments apart and we find that every segment is wrapped in a much thinner fabric than the pith, that's different again from the quality of the outer skin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you take one segment and you peel that bit off the top bit, and I don't know if you've ever done this as a child, sat and dissected an orange. Yeah,
yes.
I have. And you see babies doing, they love it, and they squeeze it and the fruit comes out, the juice. But the juice droplets are also in little tiny bags.
Yes.
Well, that's cellulose, and cellulose to a plant is fascia to a human. And what that gives you straight away is a visual sense of the textures and how different they are, but they're all basically fascia of cellulose of different expressions. One of them is very, 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 very thin and full of the juice. And one of them is a little bit thicker, but it's full of all the juice droplets close packed together. And then the next one is thicker, but it's full of segments close packed together.
Yeah.
And then if you imagine all these oranges in a bag, that's all the oranges close packed together inside a bag. So in that instance, if you imagine a closed bag of oranges, you've got a membrane containing round things, inside which is the skin of each of which is a membrane containing segmental shaped things, inside which are membranes containing juice.
Yeah.
They're all different thicknesses of the same connecting tissue. Even the bag could be. So fascia in the human body is everywhere. Oh, we've got oranges in a bag. So we think about the juice droplets in the segment, the segment in the orange, the oranges in the bag. So I want you to think of cells within an organ, organs within membranes, membranes within sections or segments of the body, body wrapped in skin, muscle segments within.
Hi, just a small break to mention that during this episode, we had a long conversation with Joanne, and I was curious about what brought her to get the knowledge she has right now. And we separated this part of the conversation to put it as a bonus that you can find on the website of unknowinglyconnected.com. So just click on the website, click on get the bonus, and you can hear this part of the conversation where Joanne explain all the relationship of her experience and background from being a chocolatier to the moment where she got kind of humiliated in a yoga test with her teachers that wanted her to learn anatomy and then fascia and embryology and so on. Why we separate it? We separate it so that you get all the references of her teachers, where they're coming from. So I suggest you to watch the video as we have inserted on purpose the names and references of those teachers or those learning, so you can dig deeper into her knowledge and background and get to know more. So I hope you're enjoying this episode and talk to you soon.
Now, what we've got to remember is that the human body was divided into its component parts by anatomists. And anatomists got permission to do that using dead bodies when René Descartes went to the Pope to get permission, because under the law, since Hippocrates, it was forbidden to dissect human bodies. And when Descartes went to the Pope to get formal sanction for science to have access to human bodies, Candace Pert describes in her book Molecules of Emotion the turf deal that the Pope did with René Descartes. And that deal was, and you will love this, you may take the body to dissect for science. However, the mind, the emotions, the soul, and the spirit, the being, in other words, will come under the jurisdiction of the church for the salvation of the soul. It's our business whether it goes to hell, heaven, or purgatory. And the intangibles then became separated from the tangibles. The being got removed from the body. And that rift became a demarcation in the West for studying disembodiment. So then we've got the psyche and the soma under two different, nobody perhaps even called it the psyche. Well, they did. Psyche meant soul. And so the soul was under the church and the soma was under science. And that was a great big huge moment in history. And what happened was the body would be opened, and mostly, there are historical exceptions, thank goodness, but mostly the fascia was scraped away as if it was a sort of packaging material under the skin. It's fairly horrible. It's full of fat pockets and stringy bits and skin ligaments and all bits and pieces. It's all... And it's called the superficial fascia, but whatever. And it's thrown away. And then even the fascia around the muscles was thrown away. But there was still this connective tissue within the muscle. So that got called muscle fiber. And then the muscle was attached to the bone, and there was always this film around the bone, but that was called peri, meaning on, and osteum, because os is bone. So the periosteum was the film around the bone, and then inside that was the bony part that was nothing to do with the muscles. The muscles were attached to the bones at these two places at either end where the tendon emerges. When in actual fact, if you study the embryo and just think about how an orange grows from an orange blossom, grows itself from the inside out. It doesn't go and get its segments put together in a farm, and neither do we. So we self-assemble from the inside out, from the get-go. And I just sat there with all this knowledge thinking, what doesn't make sense? And I suddenly thought, hang on a second, I've had a baby. I didn't go and get his limbs bolted on. He grew. And I felt him growing. And I felt him grow into his limbs. And as I was studying embryology, I realized that we actually grow our limbs. We self-assemble. We are self-assembled creatures, so everything else in nature. It's what makes us living, actually. And I thought, how is that compatible with levers? It isn't. And therein lies the drama that unfolds as we demonstrate, and I'm not the only one, that what self-assembly means. And one of the people that's done the most fabulous work on how this all works is Donald Ingber, a scientist at Harvard. And he shows how cells respond in a particular way to pressure. And it starts to explain the human body under soft matter physics instead of hard matter physics, which is how oranges form or apples. And one of the reasons I think we have such problems, Stephanie, is that we've assigned history the way we wanted to remember it and learn it. And one of the things that happened many years ago when Newton apparently watched an apple fall from a tree and decided on gravity, or however the story goes, it's complete nonsense. He knew perfectly well how gravity worked. What actually happened was he was lying on the ground in the garden under an apple tree, and he knew the speed at which the clouds were moving, and he knew the speed at which the earth was rotating relative to the sun. And he couldn't understand how the apple above his head, hanging off the tree, hung down instead of being spun out. That was his question, because he wrote a letter to a friend under the tree. So we've kind of not really got what he meant. And he invented calculus. And by so doing, we lost the art of geometry. And geometry is the study of shapes and round things that move around each other in space as volumes. And I think had we kept that study alive, we probably wouldn't have progressed in science so much, but it wouldn't have been assigned to the madness of an alchemist, i.e. Newton. But by developing calculus, he made physics went down the route of very exclusive understanding. And the way we learn about how round things fit together and move around in space was assigned to a very exclusive scientific domain. And it doesn't surprise me at all when I meet physicists who really understand human motion and music so beautifully. And Danielle Claude Martin is one example. She's written a lovely book called Living Biotensegrity, and it's all about spirals and chirality and how we are made of soft matter physics. She's a doctor of physics. And why this is so important is because we've studied the body without the fascia. We've deduced how it moves from cutting it up as if we were building ourselves again as puppets. And we've removed what Andrew Taylor Still, the father of osteopathy, said 100 years ago was the soul of a man's being resides in the fascia, is what he said. And if you think about it, it's the material, or the materia biologica, if you like, the fabric, that the embryo uses to self-assemble. So every single part of us is made of one piece of fascia, folded, enfolded, and geometrically origami formed out of one piece. That egg inside its mother self-assembles in the round by itself, apart from you feeding it and cloaking it in a liquid bath so it's gravity-free. Fluid bath, I should say. It's not liquid, it's fluid. And we come to understand that all the fluid is in fact fascia, because it's like egg white. It's a form of fascia, it's a connective tissue. And essentially fascia means binding. That's what it means, it's a binding. So when you see a fascia on the front of a house, a fascia or a soffit tells you it's a band that's holding something, or it's a band of material, or bandage. And sometimes I think it's not a brilliant word.
Yeah.
But it's basically everywhere. So what we called muscle fiber is a type of fascia. The skin could be called a type of fascia. Bone has definitely been shown to be a type of fascia with hydroxyapatite and crystalline starch, as Dr. Levin would say, in it.
Blood
Myofascia,
vessels, you said as
blood
well,
vessels.
right?
Blood is connective tissue, but it's studied separately because it's studied in developmental biology and it's not considered to be part of the connective tissue locomotor system. So we separated everything out. But okay, let me give it to you like this. Let's imagine that you could walk through a special machine that only lit your fascia. You can line an MRI, effectively that's what it does. But anyway, let's pretend. And you would see a ghost of you. But we would recognize you, Stephanie, because it is the organ of shape. So your shape, your mouth, your nose, your eyes, your ears, your lips, your body, your everything that makes you the shape you are now is very cleverly organized by your electromagnetic field within which your charged tissue knows itself as a moment-to-moment emergent property. And that ghost of you, so we wouldn't see muscle, for example, muscle protein, but we would see dense connective tissue at the center, the core, i.e. the skeleton. It wouldn't look like a skeleton in the same way that an X-ray does, but it would be something like that. And you'd have this very fine, threaded, ghostly Stephanie, but we'd know it was you. And what's changed in the last 20 to 30 years is the recognition of the significance of this fabric. So you've always been made of it. You never haven't. It's just that we're cutting it up differently, or we're preserving it. And basically what Jaap van der Waal did in 1985 was called a tissue-sparing dissection. So instead of cutting through the connective tissue to get to the muscles, he cut through the muscle, removed it to show what was left, i.e. spared, was the connective tissue. And what he discovered was that it was completely continuous throughout the body. It's under tension everywhere. So what do we mean by under tension everywhere? It's a little bit like when you open an umbrella, you tension the fabric.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you grew yourself. And the stiffer spokes were the bones, but they're cartilage in the embryo, but they grow fast. They've got a different growth rate. It's like the umbrella spokes. They grow differently. They grow much faster and they take everything around them with it, thereby unfolding it. Just like the process of you pushing the covering of the tube, as you push the covering over the tube to open the umbrella, it's how the embryo grew into itself in 360 degrees. And we are tensioned.
Yeah. So that's why, actually, because we talked about it before, and some people might not know what is, I'm not going to say it right, biotensegrity. So some people might not know this idea of tension, right, that we have within our body.
Well, when we say tensioned, we use the word tension to mean usually I'm uptight, I'm miserable, I've got too much tension, I need to relax.
Yeah.
And basically, Buckminster Fuller came up with the design of a geodesic dome. And that was the incorporation of tension and compression in a united pattern, so that the framework could tension the fabric between in such a way that it can occupy space, take up the least amount of energy, the least weight of materials. Things can move through it, and it's very, very lightweight. And one of his students, Kenneth Snelson, came up with this model of a floating compression system, which meant all these so-called tensional wires were wrapped around these compression struts in a specific way, a specific pattern that enabled this optimum use of material for lightweight, energy saving, but it resists deformation. In other words, it self-prevents resists being taken out of shape. So when you construct a geodesic dome, you push on it and it pushes back. The shape, the geometry pushes back. Just like when you squeeze an orange, a healthy, ripe orange, it pushes back. It resists you squishing it. So the inside pushes out as you push in. So now imagine that the growth of the juice on the inside pushes the skin out, and the skin resists being pushed out, and you get what's called a close packed structure. That's exactly what you do. You absorb water and nutrients and push out, and the skin resists being pushed out, and down the middle as a special structural core, you've got your frame on the inside. And Buckminster Fuller called these floating compression systems tensional integrity, and he made that word portmanteau, as it's called, and made it tensegrity. And Donald Ingber did a lot of work on cells to discover that that's how they move around, that's how they work together in close packed systems. And Dr. Stephen Levin was an orthopedic surgeon who worked out from Snelson's sculpture of the Needle Tower when he was sitting in the park looking at a obelisk and thinking, hang on a minute, we're trained that the spine is a compression structure, but it doesn't make sense of what I do in surgery. And then he looked at Snelson's Needle Tower and thought, that's what happens in surgery. There's tension and compression. But have a think about this for a minute, Stephanie. Thousands, not hundreds, thousands of years ago, yoga brought forward, let's keep this lovely and simple, the idea of the feminine and the masculine being symbolized by Ida and Pingala. Just the names of the feminine and the masculine. It doesn't mean one is feminine and the other is masculine and one is right, wrong, different to the other. Just Ida Pingala. One is represented by the moon, the other the sun. One is known for its receptivity, the other for its creativity. Two forces that combine in a spiral configuration, and when they are in balance, they facilitate the spontaneous arising of Sushumna, the neutral force. So you get the masculine and the feminine come together, and then there's this kind of whole triumvirate of Sushumna arising, of this natural energy that can channel through this tubular network formed by Ida Pingala's counter spiraling. And it turns out that's the pattern of the fascia. And the yogis talked about the nadis. Now, in Western studying of biomechanics, we talk as if the body's built as a stacked system of compression forces, which makes no sense, because as soon as you do a yoga posture where you're standing on one leg with your head to the side, your head would fall off. If you tilt, your head would fall off, and it doesn't. So how does that work? So it's a bit like lying under the apple tree saying, why isn't the apple spinning out like a carousel? You know, why doesn't my head fall off when I'm standing on one leg and leaning over? What's going on here? And the reason is because something's holding it on. It's not stacked on that which is underneath it, because I can stand with my head out to the side, you know, like that, and it doesn't fall off. In fact, my hand doesn't fall off the end of my arm. So what's going on? So if you imagine putting your hand in a glove, a surgical glove, and you keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and imagine it didn't tear, it was attached to your breastbone and your spine, it would be under a kind of tension. Well, that's what it already is. So all we've done in understanding what's called tensegrity, or as Dr. Levin calls it, biotensegrity, is we've animated the ancient yogic wisdom of Ida and Pingala. And when those two things combine in a certain spiral pattern, volume arises. We're 3D. And we've been under a kind of a two-dimensional spell when it comes to muscles and bones. And you start telling people about this, they get so excited, because you're basically talking about the tissue of the in-between. And not only is that where the magic happens as a body worker, but that is what John calls, as I said, the tissue of temporality, of timing in the body. It's how my face is shaped the way it is now, and in 10 years' time, if I'm still here, it'll probably have a different shape. It'll look older, as it looks older than it did 10 years ago. It looks older than it did 2 years ago, trust me. I think we've all aged in the last 2 years. Oh my God. Somebody told me I've got younger, and I'm like, seriously, are you kidding me? I can't even say. Anyway, what I'm saying is it's the tissue of temporality. It tells the time in your body. And it joins all the parts, all of them, everywhere. It's everywhere. And we now know that when you say, I feel, you're not just talking about your nervous system. Your nerves and, as you said, your blood vessels are made of fascia. We call it dura, we call them tunicae, but they are the fabric of everything in you. So when we understand that it's under tension, we understand that because just like the orange is under tension, in other words, something's pushing out or something's pushing in, we see these co-creative forces from which the third force arises. The pattern of matter that allows us to be, the pushing in and pushing out that creates the volume. And so in some ways it's like a new modern name for something that's thousands of years old that I suspect the Vedic sages understood pretty well, which makes me so grateful I've done this through yoga. But it's true for the body, so it doesn't matter whether you're a dancer or a singer or a movement teacher, or a hands-on manual therapist, or we're, how many miles apart are we? We're reading each other's faces as we're speaking. And you're responding to shape. If I make a smiley shape, it's like we're in sync. And if I go, I don't have to say anything, but you're thinking, did she not understand what I just said? So we're speaking this language of shape shifting all the time. And so fascia is part of our body language, and the magic of it is, it just fascinates me. It fascinates me. And I think it's the interface of what animates us into form.
So, I've been reading, the first chapter of your new book.
Have you?
I mean, the second edition of your.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Helen, sorry, I shouldn't have disappeared. I keep forgetting. I think we're doing audio and we're not. Yeah, you've read the first chapter, yes.
Yeah. And actually I got a few questions, and it made me think, because I'm not a yoga teacher and I barely knew and still don't know much about anatomy. However, linking everything together, first of all, made me think that, I mean, we haven't had time to talk about yoga, but I know many people think about yoga as stretching, basically.
I use that word, yeah.
While it's way more. So
yeah.
As I've learned through your book, you can also include what you say is like movement, quality of motion, and also power to be still and present, which includes breathing and meditation, which have been separated so far, I mean, from many teachers. But when you talk about the mix of the fascia, the way we are formed, and for me, which is a bit more my field, which is how we present ourselves, how we are, and the shape we have has an impact on the way we show up in the world. I had the first question, which was, because you talk about this tensegrity and how it works, I was thinking, like, how would you talk about people who are hypermobile, for instance? Because we always think about, stretching because you are tense. But my perception, which is absolutely not from an academic background, is that hypermobile people usually have really flexible personality and can, be really, So can we talk a little bit more about...
Yeah, I can show you something. I've got a model here that I didn't know I would need, but I'm really glad. This is Tom Flemons, who very sadly passed away, but he designed this. It's called a squish, and we call it a tensegrity because it's a toy and it's a tensegrity model, not bio-tensegrity, tensegrity because this has got two components and it's a child's toy. So this part is supposed to rattle. This doesn't play any significant role. And a lot of people mistakenly think this is representing bones and muscles, which it's not. However, what I do want to show you with two examples of these Manhattan Toy Company squishes, just to plug them, do get them, they're children's toys, they're lovely. This one, when you deform it, reforms because it has enough tensional integrity, it's stiff enough. This one, spent years getting squashed in my suitcase and it's lost, it's lax, it's lost some of that resistance to deformation. And this is akin to hypermobility if we overdo it. It's not the same thing. This isn't hypermobility. But how this helps you see it is here, what we actually want is more constraint. We actually want a little bit more stiffness. We want this to resist deformation. Whereas this one, you push it really hard and you press it and it just bounces back. And that's due to the pattern of the architecture, both tension and compression elements. Now, this is actually called a tensegrity icosahedron, which is a geometric shape that doesn't lock, partly because it represents a round thing. Round things are basically icosahedral. It's just that the more divisions there are in them, these are quite crude, but if you can imagine all these being subdivided, they pop into roundness. And when you put a lot of them in a bag, you get the outside membrane, you get the membrane of each round thing and the space in between. Back to our bag of oranges. Yes. Well, in the embryo, the membrane is the zona pellucida. The round things are the cells, which are living, so they're rapidly multiplying. And the in-between is going to become the circulatory system. Isn't that brilliant? I think that's brilliant. That excites me. That's like, how does that happen? So that's the bit that we study. That's the embryology bit. That's what inspired me. But what I'm asking you to consider is that this is actually showing you the Ida Pingala Shushumna, the tension, compression, and volume of everything. And now we're in the philosophy of yoga. But yoga wasn't separated into philosophy and postures, and Ayurveda was an entire study with 40 different key aspects, and one of those 40 was yoga, and within that were the 8 limbs, and within the 8 limbs, one of them was hatha. So we've taken bits out and disproportionately expanded postures, but the idea of the postures was to move the body until you were really adept at sitting still to go beyond the body. And balance the masculine and feminine, the dark and the light, the inner, the outer, whatever opposites you want to talk about, the dualities, and hold them together so that wholeness could emerge from the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. And this is the foundation of all ancient teachings and religions. And, you know, my studies now are in spiritual sciences. And so when I discovered this was already there and had been for thousands of years, and it's the basis of the Kabbalah and the basis of everything, it was like, oh, now I get it. Geometry, geo, earth, metry, meter, measure, comes from mater, mother, the measure of Mother Earth. And I thought, okay, so we had to evolve to get this. And now I think we're evolving very rapidly, I might add, to understand this tissue. And what's being discovered, and I'm going to throw this in because it's such an important thing, what's been discovered is not only is the tissue under tension, which means the slightest movement of any part can be felt everywhere. It happens to be the largest sensory organ of the human body, and that's fairly recent discovery. So that means your fascia feels you. And your fascia is actually your proprioceptive organ, and proprio in Latin is one's own. So proprioception means one's own self-perception. So when you move around and know where you are in space and know how far away you are from your computer or how far you are from the door when you get up to walk through it, those are all proprioceptive decisions that you make from your fascial system, whether you knew it or not. And you make them much faster than your nervous system.
Absolutely. And people would say it comes from your brain. But, because you always say like a decision comes from here, but yeah.
Well, no, we make our proprioceptive awareness motion receptors much faster than we can go via the central nervous system. That we know. But the other aspect of it is this. Dean Juhan wrote a fabulous book called Job's Body. And he suggests that just so you know, collagen, which is what fascia is made of, collagen, reticulin, and so on. There's some elastin in there, but that's not what makes it elastic. That's totally confusing. Don't get caught up in that. But every collagen fibril is a spiral, and it joins with 3 others to form a triple helix, which joins with two others, I beg your pardon, to form a triple helix. Each one joins with 2 others to form a triple helix. And then each triple helix joins with 2 others to form a triple helix. And Dean Juhan proposes that within every triple helix is cerebrospinal fluid. So it is the brain, but the brain's everywhere. Now, from my point of view, embryologically, we are heart-centered because the heart starts first, beyond the brain, feeding and syncopating the brain. So the brain might be making the music score and all of that, but the heart is the conductor in my world. Just saying.
Yeah.
I think we're heart-centered. And I think what's happening at the moment, and we won't get into it, but is that we're finding out that we're heart-centered, and that an act of kindness means more than a qualification intellectually. We're not brains on sticks walking around measured by our education. We are people, heart-centered people walking around measured by our kindness, because it's the same root as kindred. And our kindred spirit is what works. And that when you're with somebody doing a practice, whether it's yoga, dance, Bowen, healing, mummy rubbing your knee when you fell over when you were a child, reaching a hand out to just help someone cross a road, it's a kindred gesture, a collective gesture. You do you, I'll do me, and together let's do us with grace. And that right there is what works. And whatever the technique is that you're trained in, if it's done without that kindred spirit, I don't think it necessarily heals in the way that a loving hand can just be placed on you, or a thought. How many times have you had a gesture from somebody who just thought about you? And it somehow lifted your spirits or warmed your heart? You were touched by it. So it can be touch at a distance. You can touch somebody at a distance. You can feel their presence, whether it's physical or etheric. And I think we're being tuned to recognize that we naturally operate to the heart's rhythm, and the heart feeds the brain, not the other way around. We're heart first. And the heart determines, through the circulatory vessels, which are made of fascia, the pattern of where the embryonic parts are placed. So it's a little bit like the artist creating, or the conductor orchestrating the orchestra. It's not playing all the instruments, but it's making sure they go in the right place at the right time. Of course, it has to all be there everywhere. So I know it's a bit poetic and it's a bit difficult because it's multidimensional, but we are multidimensional. We're multidimensional. We're multisensory. We're multi-factored. And we don't have the language for that.
But it's getting there. Slowly.
Well, I think the fascia's helping us. Well, I don't know about me, but the fascia's helping us. And I think what happens is, because it's pre-tensioned, let me say this, that any instrument in the orchestra, of any orchestra, a real life orchestra with instruments in it, has an element of pre-tensioned structure. It's got to have structure, right? So it's got opposites involved. So even if we're talking about a percussion instrument like a triangle, that's a metal triangle, The metal triangle doesn't do anything on its own. It needs, you've got a static metal triangle, then you have a stick. And someone's got to move the stick on the triangle. So something's moving, something's still. There's your opposites. With a string instrument, you've got the strings, which are the tensional members, and the double bass body or the violin body, which are the compression members. When they're combined in a certain way and then moved, this tension and compression are the opposites. A drum skin is stretched or tensioned across a bass. There's your opposites. Do you see?
Yeah.
And so when you start thinking like that, and then you bring those opposites together, the sum of the parts arises the third thing. And my book opens with the saying from the Rumi poem. It's a sentence from a Rumi poem, one of many beautiful sentences. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoings and right doings, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And I think our fascia unites us in both tensional and compressional Ida and Pingala modalities in all different ways within the body. And by so doing, Sushumna arises, the sweet energy of the emergent property of our spirit, of our being. And our beingness is, for all of us, it's the same, Stephanie. What makes us all the same is that every single one of us is unique. And if we treat that with respect for ourselves and respect for each other, I think finding out that your body form comes under the same kind of organizational principles, I think we're growing. I know there's a lot wrong, but I think we're growing. And I think that means that we're orchestrating a higher frequency resonance field. And that when we get that our embodiment is there, we're embodied anyway. You and I are embodied. We're already embodied. We're already self-assembled. We're already amazing. Every one of you listening to this, every one of you, you self-assembled from a unicellular being into the multicellular being that you are now. You did it to the best of your ability at the time. And you always have and you always will. And just knowing that, you didn't get a PhD in embryology to self-assemble. You did it. So somewhere in that history, if we could pick it out, it's all written in this autobiographical fabric, the fascia. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because it reminds me, actually, one of my client recently who was saying like, oh, I should study this and have, we all into that state of we need more PhD and more this and that. And that's why I really like when I see you writing about uniqueness. And I remember I told her, in my point of view, I told her like to look at her finger. And I say, you've got your own unique fingerprint. And that's your uniqueness. And yes, of course, knowledge is really important, but you've got it. That's your uniqueness that you're sharing to the world. So that's something.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And your body is your body print.
Yeah.
There is not another one the same. And I know we like to feel the kindred spirit, which we're sharing now. I mean, I'm just watching you smiling and it's making me smile. And I'm thinking, isn't that lovely? Of course. And so that uniqueness overlaps and integrates and weaves together something.
Yeah.
And the sum of the parts is greater than us. There's a podcast now and other people aren't with us right now, but they're listening to it. So there you have the sushumna of the situation.
Absolutely. So one thing I found really interesting about what you're writing, and also I know you've got an online. Oh, sorry, just got frozen. You've got an online course that is, to my understanding, really available for people who haven't studied anatomy per se. So what I would like to understand, or for people to understand, is
why it would be, although we've been talking about it already, but why it would be beneficial for them to understand more about either fascia, yoga, or anatomy to deliver their work, and to be more useful, I would say, to people than just being a yoga teacher as they've been told on the, specific level, do the posture, everyone the same, and,
Well, basically,
what
I
would be
think
interesting for them to understand more about it? Yeah, sorry.
no, it's okay. I didn't realize you hadn't finished the question. I apologize. It's not just about yoga, but with the book, the reason the word yoga is on it is because it allowed me to talk about spirit and what I've just said. Ida Pingala Sushumna is deep to the yogic philosophy, so it's not my idea. And I wanted to be able to work with the subtle practices. But a number of people, even quite recently, have said, why has it even got the word yoga on it? Because it's such a fabulous resource for understanding fascia and how to integrate the anatomy that we have anyway, whether you know the names of everything or not. And movement, it makes sense of movement. And so the course that is coming online, currently I've got a mini course available that's the first 3 chapters of the book. But the course that we're bringing online is fascia anatomy and biomotion, meaning not biomechanics, but biomotion. Because we are emotional creatures that move emotionally. And I think in some ways the course will allow people to 2 things. One is explain what they experience, which I think is quite important. And the other is be able to explain it to their clients. So I really do honestly talk in plain English, and I talk about oranges and making sense of things and present them like that, because I really think it helps to understand. And I meet people in pain all the time. My podcast is completely free. It's on my website. It's called Pain Removed, Performance Improved. And it's about improving performance, whoever you are, whether you're somebody that walks your dog or an advanced yoga teacher or a Pilates instructor or a body worker of any stripe or a mother of kids that fall over and hurt themselves. You appreciate the subtle nuances of your experience that are actually being fed to you by your fascia. Perfect example I had today. Dear friends of mine, through lockdown, their doctor said, keep moving. And so they went for a walk every single day, 7 to 10 miles every day. And after 8 to 12 months, started odd aches and pains, and now there's a few structural issues. One of the things that we know about the fascia, if you take it and that's a fair walk, 10 miles, that's 12 to 15 kilometers, that's a fair romp. And I'm talking about people in their 70s, so they're not youngsters by any means, but very fit, healthy people. And I said, did you know, for example, that fascia, when you exercise it beyond a certain baseline, if you walk your dog every single day for 20 minutes, that's your baseline. We're talking about what you do beyond that. Actually it's in a mixture of collagen deficit and collagen synthesis. And it takes about 30 hours to actually go into collagen synthesis. So if you repeat an exercise within 30 hours, or you train for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, you're actually not allowing your connective tissue system to fully recover. And that can become an emotional thing. You start feeling a bit sad or a bit depleted or a bit fatigued. What's the matter with me? I don't understand it. I can't sleep very well. I'm getting really agitated. And I have to unpick everything back to, how are you treating your fascia? And so I found myself saying, can I persuade you to do a 20-minute walk every other day? I'm not telling you not to move. I'm not telling you to keep still, but can I just ask you to make a 30-hour gap between your walks instead of 24? Because what's happened over a year is this very slow accumulation of collagen deficit. And what that means is when somebody trips or falls or hurt themselves, the impact of that isn't recovering quickly enough for the timing. of that age group or stage of fitness if they're recovering from an illness in a younger person. So all these things have different time frames. And when we discover the importance of the relationship between fascia and time, it can transform what you expect of yourself. And when you hold yourself as being a bio-emotional creature rather than a biomechanical functioning machine, there's nothing mechanical about you, you start forgiving yourself and demanding of yourself in a tissue appropriate manner. And that means, as in any orchestra, playing the pauses. And we don't. When I say to people, what kind of movements do you do? What's your day like? The answer is invariably how many runs they do, how many classes they do, or how many sports and events they do. That's what they say. Oh, I play squash 3 times a week. I go to the gym as often as I can, and I do a Pilates class every Friday. And I'm like, well, excuse me, what are you doing the rest of the time? Are you sat at a desk? Do you stand all day in a shop? What do you do? Oh, I'm an air steward. I'm on my feet the whole time, and then I work nights. Well, that changes everything. That immediately tells me that they're required to be nocturnal, that their exposure to light's changing, their adrenal cortisol reactions, the endocrine system works differently without light, all those things. So those are specializations of whatever you study. But what we all know is that we have rhythmical cycles. And when they're disturbed enough, it affects our bio-emotional rhythms. And it's not a mechanical thing. It never was. It's never going to be understood that way. And one of the things I think that's happening at the moment, and it's happening for men and women, is this so-called increase in mental health issues. And I think some of that is because you can't reduce human beings down to biomechanical function. They need to hear themselves. They need to feel how they're doing. And just knowing that your connective tissue matrix is everywhere and it requires 30 hours to recover means it's fine to move around a lot every other day. You'll be fine. Over a 2-week period, that's your long-term management system. Training more every day doesn't mean getting fitter. And we are dealing all the time, my colleagues and I, with overtrained kids and overtrained adults. And when you say to them, I want you to do less, they think you don't understand their sport. But it changes everything. And when we go back to the idea of the orchestra, Stephanie, that's the key, that we play the pauses. And the pauses are as important. The rest time, the social time, the switch off time is as important as the action. They're both playing a very significant role in how we know how to relax and be.
Absolutely. Joanne, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. And
always. Thank you, Stephanie, to talk to you. It's been so lovely. I've enjoyed it every time I've spoken to you. Thank you. It was
really lovely. Before you leave, I usually ask this question to everyone. Is a simple question, maybe a bit profound, but what is your wish? If you could have a wish.
What is my wish?
Yes. There would be a wish you would like for people.
I find myself thinking of light. And light for me stands for loving in God's heart together. And you don't have to believe in God, whatever. I'm not talking about some off-planet man with a Christmas list that only gives you presents if you're good. I don't mean that. For me, living in Grace's heart together. Light. And we're creatures of light. We're creatures of love. We're creatures of sound because we resonate. That's because we're designed as an instrument. And I have my logo is a globe with the flower of life inside it. And we call them peeps. They look like flowers, but they're actually people sitting all the way around the globe. And I have this dream that one day, if every single human being on this planet would just sit down cross-legged on the floor, on the ground, for 1 minute of silent love, light, and sound, that we would completely transform this planet. So I guess be lightful.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Joanne.
That's my wish.
Before you leave, I have a small gift for you. I talked to someone that, because I looked at your work and suddenly was like, I think someone would be interesting to your work that you may not know. And I've got a small video for you. So if you have 1 second.
Hi, Joanne. What a pleasure to learn about your work and your new book on yoga and fascia. I have to say, my interest in this topic dates back about 50 years when I was first diagnosed with a secondary scoliosis. Fortunately, I got into studying the body through Tai Chi, then yoga, Aikido, dance, contact improv, and just living. And as one of the co-creators of the heart math system, I became also very intrigued with the interplay between our bodies, our minds, our emotions, our heart. And later in life, I continue to be challenged to learn, how do I get deeper into where there is tension, where there is pain, where there is stiffness, et cetera, inflammation. And so I'm fascinated to learn more about this approach. The more I learn about the fascia, the more I hear people like you discussing its miraculous role in the human body and overall well-being, the more excited I actually become for humanity. Because so many people, I think, are dealing with troubling chronic pain and chronic issues that limit mobility, limit movement, limit enjoyment of life. So thank you so much for this contribution you're making to the world. And I would love to learn more as much as I can. Thank you again.
So this is Bruce Cryer. So Bruce Cryer has been for 20 years the CEO of the Heart Math Institute.
I know who he is.
And now is president of the Graduate Institute. And I thought you had quite a few things in common to share. So there.
Stephanie, thank you so much. You've got no idea what that means to me at this particular point. I'm a bit tearful. Excuse me. Thank you for showing that to him. And I have so much admiration for his work. And I can't tell you, you have just embodied your podcast in magic. Thank you.
So if you want to connect, there you are.
Well, connect us. I would love that. And you will be loved and honored and credited for it. And let's make an even bigger difference in the world. How fabulous. I've studied some of his work, and I know who he is, and I'm just like that. I can't tell you. I was at a point in my life where it was like, I either write this book or I study with the Heart Math Institute, and I thought, I've absolutely got to finish this book. And then it went into second edition, and it's been a real bonus to have the people that have supported me in writing it. And I was able to bring my colleague John Sharkey more involved, because his work is in the background of education. And bringing that through, because I can now lean into knowledge that we have, and research that's now been done out of questions that were asked 10 years ago and 5 years ago, and now it's like, wow, I don't know what to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
to join, and looking forward to talk to you soon then.
Yeah, and we'll meet again. Yeah, please. I'd love to do that. Stephanie, thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As you can see, I'm taking great care of each episode so you can get the most information out of it and the best learning. So if you can, subscribe to Unknowingly Connected on your podcasts, Apple Podcast or other media you're using, or on YouTube if you're watching the videos. I would suggest also, if you're still interested and curious about Joanne's world and this world around anatomy, fascia, and its relationship with the world, to listen to Neil Fay's episodes that we have in Unknowingly Connected. And if you have any comments, suggestions, don't hesitate to contact me. And looking forward to the next episode. Thank you. And don't forget, it's all connected and we might not even know it. See you soon.